those that just joined us, my name is Francisco Rosas. I am the Assistant Director of Admissions for Joaquin College of Law. Today's, we actually have our Director of Admissions, Diane Steele, as well on this presentation. And today's presentation will be facilitated by Professor Andrew Kucera, who some of you might have seen right now. During the presentation, if you have questions for Professor Kucera, as he's going along with the problems, you could simply go to the group chats, right? And just write your question there, and he'll be able to answer it along the way. If you want to speak, you could actually go over to the participants tab, and there will be a raise hand tab on there. If you raise your hand, he will also get you that way, and then you could ask him the question verbally as well. So we have those two methods of being able to ask questions of Professor Kucera. Hey, Diane, how you doing?
Good morning, everybody. We're so happy that you're here and want to welcome you. We're very excited to be able to bring this to you remotely. We realize it's been challenging getting registered for that LSAT, and we're hopeful that that you make the deadline, which is what, Javier, the 24th?
April 24th, correct.
Right, it's a deadline for the June 8th LSAT, which is acceptable for fall admissions. So we're really happy to see you. Thank you, Professor Kucera, and welcome.
Yeah, if of those that I have not got your first and last name, if you could just send them to me via that group chat privately, I would appreciate it. It's just for taking attendance. So I would definitely appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for being here. All right, Professor Kucera, let me know when you want to start this. Are you ready? And we'll go ahead and get started. So we could keep in mind everybody's time here, and those that keep on coming in, I'll make sure that we're getting them ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, so with that said, once again, for those that are joining, my name is Francisco Rosas, and I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions for Joaquin College of Law. You just heard a little bit from our Director of Admissions, Diane Steele, and we are now going to get started with our presentation. Thank you for being here today. Let me just the floor.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy Saturday mornings to spend with us. I hope the next 2 hours are going to be useful for you. I'll do everything I can to make sure that they are. So Francisco went over kind of some ground rules for Zoom. You know, as always, if you have any questions, just type them into the chat box. There is a toggle to change your chat from chatting with everyone and chatting with just one of the presenters. So make sure and use that if you need. I'll also mention that we're going to be recording today's presentation, so future prospective students can access it online and see. So I have you for about 2 hours today, and the format that we're going to go through is I have a short slide presentation on the LSAT, which we'll do for about the first 25 minutes. And then the last hour and a half will be some work with logic games section of the LSAT. And there's a reason that we pick logic games for this, and I'll explain that to you in a little bit. But to get back to an introduction, my name is Andy Kucera, and I'm adjunct faculty at San Joaquin College of Law. I've been teaching here for about 6 years as adjunct faculty, and then full-time faculty, and now adjunct faculty again. And I've taught lots of subjects, including real property, remedies, drafting classes, capstone classes, legal technology, community lawyering, and practice management. So I really enjoy teaching, and I love the school, and this is a great place to attend school and also to teach. And I should mention that I was a student at San Joaquin before I was a teacher. I graduated in 2013, and since then have been practicing as a lawyer. My day job currently is I'm the supervising attorney for the pro bono program at Central California Legal Services. Central California Legal Services is the legal aid organization that serves the 6-county area of Fresno, Tulare, Kings, Merced, Mariposa, and Tuolumne counties. And so I coordinate all of the lawyers, all of the private lawyers that do pro bono service through CCLS for our service area. And so that's my day job. I'll give you my email address later on in the presentation if you have any specific questions for me. But what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and get started on our presentation. And so again, I'm going to share my screen, which has a slide presentation. And so I'm not sure if afterwards you'll see my video, but you will see the slides. So bear with me while we while we do this. I should also mention that this is only the second time that we've done this remotely. We're all kind of doing our best to react to the situation with the COVID and the shelter-in-place orders, and so you know, this is a little bit new to us. So if we have any technical hurdles, then just bear with us. But the first one that we did last week or the week before went fairly well, so hopefully this one will too. All right, so I've already introduced myself. We're going to be talking today about the LSAT, or Law School Admissions Test. To start off with, what is the LSAT? It's a half-day standardized test. It's required for admission to most law schools, and it's used to assess law school applicants. Now, a couple things here. It is required for admission to most law schools. Modernly, some law schools are also accepting other tests than the LSAT, like the GRE. But you know, that test is really no easier, no harder. So traditionally, it's been the LSAT, and most schools still only accept the LSAT for law school. It's used to assess law school applicants. It's not the only method of assessment of law school applicants, but it's one very important one. So law schools will, in addition to the LSAT, look at your undergraduate GPA. They will look at any essays that you write as part of your application package. They may look at whether or not you've done any graduate coursework or graduate degree programs and your grades in those programs. And then they will look at your LSAT, and again, it's not the only method of assessment, but it's an important one. And one of the reasons that that the LSAT is used is because it's a fairly objective test, because everybody takes the same test. It doesn't matter when you take it, and I'll get to that in a moment. But it's a fairly objective method of evaluating law school applicants, and so that's why law schools use it to assess applicants. So why require the LSAT? And this gets into, you know, some of the content on the LSAT, and you know, why this is a good test to objectively measure law school applicants. And that's because the LSAT as a test measures skills that are considered essential for success in law school. And those are reading comprehension, analytical reasoning, and logical reasoning, which also just happen to be the names of the 3 different substantive sections of the LSAT. So the LSAT measures skills that are considered essential for success in law school, and these are also, by the way, the same skills that are important for success as a practicing attorney: reading comprehension, analytical reasoning, and logical reasoning. So presumably, if you get a very high score on the LSAT, then you have very high levels of these skills, and will do well in law school, and will do well as a practicing attorney, and vice versa. What is in the LSAT? So we're going to get to in a minute some tweaks with the LSAT Flex, but traditionally the LSAT is 5 35-minute multiple choice sections. You have 1 analytical reasoning section, 1 reading comprehension section, 2 logical reasoning sections, and 1 experimental section. And a little bit about the experimental section. The experimental section is looks and feels like one of the other sections, so it will be an additional analytical reasoning or reading comprehension or logical reasoning section. You won't know which one it is. You will know, for example, if you have 2 reading comprehension sections in the LSAT that you're taking, that one of them is experimental, but you won't know which one is experimental. And I'll explain also that it doesn't really matter. And you probably shouldn't spend any time or energy trying to figure out which one is experimental. The experimental section is used to test questions. So LSAC, the Law School Admissions Council, which administers the LSAT, can decide whether or not to use those questions on future LSATs. So to decide whether or not they're good questions or not good questions. And they can do that by running statistical analyses on the answers, the right answers and the wrong answers. And so those questions might appear in a scored section on a future LSAT. But you really can't tell. So just treat all 5 sections as if they're scored and don't worry about the experimental section and you'll do just fine. There's also a 35-minute writing sample that used to be administered with the LSAT when you went to the test center to take it. That now is done offline, usually later. I say offline because it's not with the rest of the test sections, but it's online in the sense that you're going to take that sitting in front of a computer at your home with an online proctor watching you. That's 35 minutes. The writing sample is not scored, but law schools do get a copy of your writing sample. So I like to say that doing well on the writing sample will not guarantee your admission to law school. But if you write a poor writing sample, it may affect your admission to law school. How is the LSAT scored? Bear with me just a moment and let me check to see if we have any anybody with questions. Excellent, okay. So the LSAT has 100 scored questions, and out of 100 scored questions, your score is determined by the number of those questions that you get correct. So remember, there's 4 scored sections, so that's approximately 25 questions per scored section. And your score is strictly the number of questions that you get right. And that's called a raw score. So that's the number of questions that you get right out of approximately 100 questions on the test. The number that you get right is then converted to a scaled score of between 120 and 180. So 120 being the lowest and 180 being the highest. So why convert your raw score to a scaled score? And the reason for doing that is to account for small inconsistencies or differences between different administrations of the LSAT, because every administration is going to have slightly different questions. Maybe one might be slightly more difficult than another, not to the point where you could tell when you're taking the test, but you know, again, statistical analyses reveal some of these things. And so by converting your raw score to a scaled score, they can make slight changes in that conversion to make sure that regardless of when you take the LSAT, like which actual test you take, that your score is consistent with other test takers that took LSATs at a different time. So you don't have to worry about taking a particular LSAT and feeling like, oh, well, that was a very difficult LSAT. It's worked out in the scaled score. Another important thing about scoring is what's called your percentile rank. And your percentile rank is a way to determine your performance on the LSAT as compared to the performance of other test takers. And I like to point this out for one reason, and that is because a small change in the number of questions you get right causes a large change in your percentile rank. And how I like to illustrate this is if you get about 58 questions right on the LSAT, that converts to a scaled score of about 151, which puts you in about the 50th percentile. Now, 50th percentile meaning that 50% of the test takers, or half, did worse than you on the LSAT, and 50% of the test takers, or the other half, did better than you on the LSAT. Now, if you get just 5 more questions right out of 100, so go from 58 to 63, that's a scaled score of 154, but that puts you in the 60th percentile rank. So now 60% of LSAT takers have done worse than you, and only 40% have done better than you. So I like to illustrate that for the reason that a small change in the number of questions you get right leads to a very large change in your percentile rank. So every question counts. Now, when we talk about scoring, it usually comes up of, am I penalized for guessing? And the answer is no, because your score is only determined by the number of questions you get right. So if you don't answer a question, or if you get a question wrong, that is a question you didn't get right. And so they're treated the same. So there's no penalty for guessing. So that means that you should answer every question on the LSAT. And if you don't, you're missing an opportunity for a point. All right, so just a little bit about the 3 different sections of the LSAT. The first one, Analytical Reasoning, which we like to call logic games, measures your ability to understand a structure of relationships and to draw logical conclusions about that structure. And I'm going to describe the other 2 also. Reading Comprehension measures your ability to read with understanding and insight examples of lengthy and complex materials similar to those commonly encountered in law school. So you can hopefully start to see now why the LSAT is a good test for predicting your success in law school and as a practicing attorney, because in law school and as a practicing attorney, you deal with lengthy and complex materials. And so your ability to read and understand those is important. And last, Logical Reasoning assesses your ability to analyze, critically evaluate, and complete arguments as they occur in ordinary language. A little bit about the Logical Reasoning section. So I mentioned before in scoring that you will have 2 scored Logical Reasoning sections, only 1 of logic games and only 1 of reading comprehension. So that makes Logical Reasoning weighted the most, approximately 50% of your score, and weighted twice as much as either the logic game section or the reading comprehension section. So why don't we talk about logical reasoning in this LSAT presentation? And there's a very good reason for that, and that is that we only have 2 hours together. I want to teach you something useful that you can take home and use to do better on the LSAT. And with logic games, we can do that because there are some strategies that take a fairly short period of time to understand and start to use. The logical reasoning section is much more complicated in terms of the number of question types, the strategies for answering the questions. And so if I spent a half an hour teaching you about logical reasoning, you probably would just leave maybe more confused than when you arrived, and we don't want that. So obviously the LSAT is going to take a whole lot of preparation in addition to today's session, but that's the reason that we don't do logical reasoning questions in this session. Plus I'll add that logic games for some reason is the section that most students say that they have the most difficulty with. And so to give you a sense of comfort and accomplishment, we try to demystify a little bit the logic games. All right, so let's talk a little bit about LSAT strategy. There's 3 strategy kind of categories that I like to talk about, to get you thinking about what you need to do to prepare for the LSAT. The first is mastery, and mastery deals with your substantive skill or ability in answering questions correctly. And you might think, well, that's all the LSAT is, just answering questions correctly. Yes, but the less obvious ones, timing and endurance, are important also. But mastery is going to take a lot of practice. And the thing about the LSAT is, if you master the LSAT, you can do extremely well on it, but you need to learn what the question types are. You need to learn what the answer choice types are. And you need to learn the different strategies for answering different questions in different sections of the LSAT. And so all of that goes to mastery. And mastery is helped by taking full-length timed practice tests and then doing individual question work in between, and lots and lots of preparation. Timing is important also. You have about 35 minutes for a 25 question section, which works out to about 1.3 minutes per question. That's not a lot. And so you need to move through the LSAT at a pretty steady clip. The other consideration with timing is that the LSAT purposefully doesn't present all of the questions in order of difficulty. So you might think, well, they're going to put the easiest questions first and the hardest questions at the end, or they're going to put the easiest game first and the hardest game, last in the logic game section. But they don't do that. And they specifically organize it so that test takers that have poor timing skills don't do well. And so you need to make sure that you know how much time you have left on the clock, how much time the questions are taking you, and you need to understand what the LSAT does as far as organizing questions to eat up that time. And one thing they'll commonly do is the question difficulty will build from easier to harder, but it will max out at about 3/4 of the way through the section. And then after that, there are some easy questions that maybe some test takers never get to because they get bogged down on the harder questions earlier in the section. The other thing is that in reading comprehension and logic games, not all of the reading passages and games are presented in order of difficulty. So, game number 1 on the test might be the most difficult, and game number 4 might be the easiest. So you're going to want to spend, a minute or so, or a minute and a half at the very beginning of your logic game section, and also for reading comprehension, and determine what order you're going to tackle the games and the passages in. And that triage is really important for timing. And then the last strategy component is endurance. And endurance is important because unless you take tests like this for a living, and I doubt you do, it's something different for you to put yourself through to take a 3 or 4 hour test. Mentally and physiologically, it's something that you need to prepare for. And you can get, mentally and physically fatigued during a 3 or 4 hour test like this. The way you build endurance is to take several full-length timed practice tests before you sit for the real LSAT, so you know how your body reacts to testing for a period that long. And so, that endurance is often overlooked, but it's a very important strategy component of the LSAT. All right, so let's talk a little bit about logic games before we get to our questions. The first thing to know about logic games is there's different types of games, and one of your initial challenges is to determine what type of game each game is. And this is just a list of the games and generally what you're being asked to do in each game type. Now, these are not listed in order of difficulty because you can certainly have difficult sequencing games and maybe easy matching games. But more often than not, the sequencing games are a little easier, and they kind of get more difficult as you go down the list here. So in a sequencing game, you're ordering or ranking entities. The entities are the people or the participants in the game, and you're putting them in order or you're ranking them. That's a sequencing game. In a selection game, you're choosing a smaller group from a larger group of entities. In matching, you're matching two kinds of entities to each other, or a set of entities with attributes for that entity. And a distribution game, you're separating entities into groups. The last one is called a hybrid game, and hybrid games are typically more difficult, but they're very common. Usually each section includes a hybrid game, and that's a combination of one of the above game types. So it could be, sequencing and matching, or sequencing and distribution. So sometimes you're being asked to do more than one of these things in a game, and that's a hybrid game. Our strategy for logic games. Number one is our overview, and that's why we want to learn the game types that we just discussed, because in our overview, we're going to read the introductory paragraph of the game, and we're going to learn who the players are, and we're going to try to identify what type of game we're doing based on what we're being asked to do. Now, today, we're probably only going to get through some sequencing games, and we won't get to the other game types. But that's because we start in the beginning in this presentation, so I can teach you something useful, and different attendees at this event have done different amounts of test prep, and some are just being exposed to the LSAT for the first time. So we kind of start in the beginning. But there will certainly be some difficult stuff for those of you that have been doing this for a bit. Our second strategy step is to draw a picture. And drawing a picture is, a picture is also called a sketch. Usually you will draw what's called a master sketch, which is a sketch from the game overview that you apply to every question in the game. And so we'll talk about what that looks like. But generally, once you identify a game type, you have a stock or canned master sketch that you use for every game of that type. Our third strategy step is going to be to read the rules, which are the little indented sentences below the opening paragraph. And the rules are the constraints over how the game operates. And our goal with the rules is going to be to read the rules, interpret them, and then write them into our master sketch if we can. And if we can't, to find a way to represent them in shorthand, near our master sketch. And the fourth step, which is probably the most difficult for everybody, or the step that lots of test takers tend to skip, but is also probably the most important, is making deductions. And making deductions is about combining rules to find out what else must be true. So if you have two rules, say, for example, that implicate the same entity, and there's a way to combine those rules to find out what else must be true, that's a deduction. So step 4, making deductions. And then step 5 is answer the questions. And so you're doing all of those steps 1 through 4 before you even look at the first question. And I will say a mistake that many test takers make is to read the game and then go immediately to the questions and attempt to answer the questions without going through these steps 1 through 4. And on an easy game with easy questions, that might work out for you. But not all of the games and questions on the LSAT are easy. And so, that strategy will probably break down when you get to more difficult, games and questions. And then, so the last is answer the questions, and you're going to want to learn question types because each question in the logic game section has its own question type. And so we'll be doing some of that work today also, identifying question types. All right, so we're going to switch gears right now because it's 10:30, and that's about how much time we have allotted to some general LSAT information. So I will open it up to questions. So if you have a question about anything that I just went over, feel free to type that into the chat box. if it's a question that you want everybody to see, then you can send your message to everyone. If it's one you want only me to see, then I'll answer the question here. So let's see, we have a question. How much time per question did you say per question average? About 1.3 minutes. So there's between 24 and 26 questions in each section, and you have 35 minutes to answer them. So so the math works out to about 1.3 minutes per question. There's a question, is there anything you can recommend to keep our test endurance up? Yes, and you know, some of the things that sound basic, you know, physiologically, you know, diet and exercise are very important. You know, make sure you eat a good meal before you take the test. You know, make sure you have a routine that includes some exercise. And as far as mental endurance, full length timed practice tests. So I would recommend at least 3 before you sit for the LSAT. And there are lots of books that you can buy that have real LSATs, past LSATs in them. And they have score converters in the back. So you can sit down and you can time yourself for a full length practice test, all 4 scored sections, and then see how many you got right, and then go to the back and convert that to a scaled score. And you can see what your scaled score would have been for that LSAT. And if you do that at least 3 times before you sit for the actual LSAT, then you will have a really good idea of what your endurance will be like for sitting for the LSAT. And that will improve your endurance. So if you do more than 3, you know, again, your endurance will improve as you do that. There's a question, will the May LSAT Flex be accepted? And I'll let Francisco address that when we're done with logic games. Or Francisco, do you want to address that now?
Yeah, I can go ahead and really quickly address it. So yeah, the short answer is yes, right? They will accept the May Flex LSATs, and that's just simply to accommodate those that had registered for the March and got canceled, and then also were pushed to the April, and those that registered for the April got canceled. So short answer is yes, they will be accepting the May LSAT Flex. I'll hand it over to you now.
Yeah, so since that question is brought up, the LSAT Flex has a slightly different format. There are only going to be 3 scored sections on the LSAT Flex. There's 1 each of logical reasoning, reading comprehension, and logic games. So you know, it's going to be a slightly shorter test, but that's really only for that May LSAT Flex. And then presumably in June, at least LSAC is planning to go back to the normally administered test. So when I described, you know, the number of sections earlier, you know, at this point, that's what you'll experience in June, and May will just be a little bit different. All right, so if there's any other questions, just go ahead and type them in the chat box, and we're going to go ahead and get started. You know, so normally when we do this in a classroom, we would take a break about halfway through. Since we're all attending remotely, if you need to take a break, just feel free to take a break anytime. I will go straight through. And so, you know, when you jump back in, you know, you don't have to leave the Zoom meeting and come back. You can just go do what you need to do. And when you come back, you know, jump back into to where we are. Okay, so so some things about logic games. You have a packet that was sent to you that has a number of games in it, and then it has a cover page that has a list of game types and citations to the games that are in the packet. And so, for example, the way these read is a PT number, and PT stands for practice test. And what LSAC does is after they release an LSAT, or after they administer it, they release the 4 scored sections as what they call a practice test, and they're numbered in order of, in chronological order. So for example, practice test 77, is probably like, the June 2008 administration of the LSAT. And then the citation includes the section number and the game number. And so if any of these questions you want additional help with, or official answers and explanations from LSAC or another testing company, you can use this citation to look up the game, to see what practice test it's in, what section number and what game number. And LSAC and Kaplan and Princeton Review and other test prep companies release books of these practice tests and also of the answers and explanations to these practice tests. And bang for your buck, that's probably some of the best test prep you can do, is to buy one of those books and work through it. So for our purposes, we're going to start with game number 2 in the packet. I try to mix it up a little bit. Usually we start with game number 1, and in case we have people attending more than one, but we're all going to learn the same things, and we won't get through 10 games for sure. We'll get through 2 games today, maybe 3 if we're moving really quickly. But I do want to emphasize, quality over quantity. So the goal today is to learn something about logic games. So let's start with game number 2 in our list, which is practice test 76, section 3, game 1 on recruiting criminal accomplices. And so in your packet, there's a page number, I think 184 at the top, and there's the number 3 with some triangles around it. And I'm going to switch the screen so you can see a whiteboard instead of my PowerPoint presentation. And so on this whiteboard, I'll have the ability to, to draw, what we're doing in the games. I usually get the question in Zoom about the whiteboard. Depending on your computer configuration, if you have a chat window or a window for the participants, you can move those around. So you can see the entire whiteboard. So if one of those windows covers up what I'm drawing on the whiteboard, just move it around. All right. So and remember, as we do this, we're going to be going through our 5-step strategy for logic games, which was on one of the slides. And don't worry about remembering it, because we're going to go through it more than once here. Our first step is, well, let me start by reading the directions. And I don't know if these directions are current on the new digital version of the LSAT, but I have a couple comments on them. And so the directions at the top say, each group of questions in this section is based on a set of conditions. In answering some of the questions, it may be useful to draw a rough diagram. All right, that's misleading, because it's not just useful to draw a rough diagram, it's absolutely imperative that you draw a diagram. You cannot answer logic games unless you're just insanely brilliant without drawing a sketch. So that's more than just useful. And then next it says, choose the response that most accurately and completely answers each question and blacken the corresponding space on your answer sheet. You don't have a paper answer sheet, so you're not filling in bubbles, but that might imply choose the response that most accurately and completely answers each question. That of the 5 answer choices, you have one answer choice that is better than the others, and thus that would be the correct answer choice. And that's not the case. There is one answer choice that is categorically correct, and 4 answer choices that are categorically wrong, meaning there's a specific reason that they're wrong. So you are looking not for the answer choice that is better than the others, but the answer choice that is correct, and the other 4 are incorrect. All right, so our overall or our overview, which is step 1 of our strategy, is to read the opening paragraph and identify the game type and what we're being asked to do in the game. So this says a detective is trying to determine the order in which a criminal recruited 7 accomplices: Peters, Quinn, Rivero, Stanton, Tao, Villas, and White. In addition to discovering that the suspect recruited the accomplices one at a time, the detective has established the following. All right, so that's the introductory paragraph. What we're being asked to do is determine the order in which a criminal recruited accomplices. There's 7 accomplices, and they're going to be ordered or ranked from 1 to 7. We have the additional information that they were recruited one at a time. So what our sketch will look like for this is seven lines, 1 for each accomplice. And if we want, we can even number them one through 7. And then what we're also going to do in a slightly different color is we're going to list the entities. And so we have P, Q, R, S, T, V, and W. All right, so based on the overview, this is what our sketch looks like. And that's simply a list of the entities, or a roster of the entities, P, Q, R, S, T, V, and W, and our 7 positions for the 7 accomplices. So that's step 1. Step 2 is read the rules. And so again, when we read the rules, we're going to read and interpret them, and if we can draw them into our master sketch, great. If we can't, then we're going to look for a way to represent them in shorthand nearby. So rule number 1 says, Stanton was recruited neither immediately before nor immediately after Tao. So the easiest way to represent this is no TS or ST. And that simply means that T cannot be next to S, either before or after it. The second rule says Quinn was recruited earlier than Rivero. So the easiest way to represent this is Q with a dash and an R. And that simply means that Q comes before R. And so I'm representing these in shorthand nearby the sketch because we can't really plug them into the sketch. The third rule says Villas was recruited immediately before White. So this third rule looks a little bit like the second rule, but notice how they're different. The second rule says Quinn was recruited earlier than Rivero. The third rule says Villas was recruited immediately before White. So immediately before is different than earlier. And what this is going to look like is VW, and then I'm going to draw a box around the VW. And that VW is what's called a block of entities. Because W has to come immediately after V, those 2 entities have to fit in the sketch somewhere together. That's a block of entities. And then the last rule says Peters was recruited 4th. That's nice. That's a concrete rule. And the nice thing about a concrete rule is that we can put it right in the sketch. So Peters was recruited 4th. We're going to put Peters in the sketch at 4th. And then I'm just going to move Peters a little. All right, so now we're done with step 2. That's reading and interpreting the rules. I'm sorry, step 2 is our sketch. Step 3 is reading and interpreting the rules. Step 4 is making deductions. So without belaboring the point here, I'm going to tell you that this game is a little bit unusual. It's unusual because there are no deductions that you can make up front. And you'll see when we get to the next game, the types of deductions that we can make by combining rules. But it's also a good chance to point out that every game on the LSAT is different, and you can't say, well, you know, this is always the case, or, you know, in sequencing games, you always have to do this. There are different types of games. You're being asked to do different things. Not all question types are going to show up in all games. And this game is just a one-off where there's no deductions you can make up front. But don't worry, because we're going to be making plenty of deductions when we get to the questions in this game. So step 4, making deductions, we'll skip for now because there aren't any to make. And let's go to question 1, which is step 5, is the questions. So question 1 says, which of the following could be the order in which the accomplices were recruited from first to last? So I told you I would tell you something useful today. And here's one that you can take home and hopefully get at least 1 free point on the LSAT that you take. This question type is called an acceptability question. And an acceptability question is asking you one thing, and that is, what is an acceptable combination or an acceptable outcome of the game? And you have 5 answer choices. One of them is going to be an acceptable outcome of the game that doesn't violate any of the rules. The 4 wrong answer choices are not going to be acceptable outcomes of the game, meaning they're going to violate one or more of the rules. I have a question here that is probably relevant. It says, on the new LSAT, do I have to make my diagram electronically? The answer is no. You will have scratch paper that you can use. And so you will be answering the questions electronically because you'll have a tablet, but you'll need to do this type of work on scratch paper. So bring sharp pencils. So hopefully that answers the question. Back to question 1. Our strategy for answering an acceptability question is to read the rules and try to find out which answer choices violate the rules. So taking, for example, rule number 1, it says Stanton was recruited neither immediately before nor immediately after tau. So is there an answer choice or 2 or more that violate that rule? So if you know it, go ahead and type it in the chat box. And if you're light years ahead of me and everybody else and you already know the answer to the question, just keep that to yourself for now. But you know, we're going to be going through this step by step. So rule number 1, Stanton was recruited neither immediately before nor immediately after tau. That's our no TS or ST rule. And the question was, is there an answer choice that violates that rule? And Gustavo's right, it's answer choice A, because answer choice A has T second and S third. So we can eliminate answer choice A. It's a wrong answer because it violates one of the rules. And the question is asking us, what is an acceptable outcome of the game? So let's look now at rule number 2. Quinn was recruited earlier than Rivero. That's our Q before R rule. Is there an answer choice that violates that rule? And if you know, go ahead and type it in the chat box. Our rule is that Q has to come before R. So the question is, which answer choice, if any, violate that rule? Aliana says answer choice E. That's right, because E has Q 7th and R 5th. So that violates rule number 2. So you can cross out answer choice E. let's look at rule number 3. Vilas was recruited immediately before White. So that's our VY block. So which answer choice violates, I'm sorry, not VY, VW. Which answer choice violates the VW block? And if you know that, type it in the chat. So it's answer choice B is eliminated with rule number 3, because answer choice B has W as second and V as sixth. So answer choice B is eliminated by rule 3. And now rule 4, Peters was recruited 4th. All we need to do is look for the answer choice that does not have Peters in the 4th position. And if you know which one that is, go ahead and type it in the chat box. So question or rule 4 is going to eliminate answer choice C, because C has Peters 5th. So our correct answer is D, because that is the only answer choice that doesn't violate any of the 4 rules. Now, one of the things you might have noticed from that question is that each rule eliminated one and only one of the answer choices. And that doesn't always happen, but it's not uncommon. And one of the things about an acceptability question is that even if you missed getting the deductions up front, you should still be able to answer the acceptability question correctly, because it's simply a matter of reading the rules and applying the rules to the answer choices. So the acceptability question should be a free point for you on every LSAT game where you see an acceptability question, even if it's a difficult game and the deductions are difficult. Simply read the rules and apply them to the answer choices. So that's question 1. The correct answer is D, as in David, and we'll move on to question number 2. So that's an acceptability question. Now you have something to put in your pocket. Question number 2 says, which one of the following could be the list of the middle 5 accomplices in the order in which they were recruited from 2nd to 6th? So this question type is called a partial acceptability question. Now it's called a partial acceptability question because you're still being asked what is an acceptable outcome of the game, but you're not being given the full list of entities. You're only being given part of it. So it's a little bit more work than an acceptability question. And the strategy on a partial acceptability question is to take the answer choices one at a time and determine if they violate any of the rules. Now, when you do this, the extra step that you have to do, because it's a partial acceptability question, is think about which entities are missing from the partial list. And if you were to complete the list, where would those entities have to go? So we'll start with answer choice A in question 2. And remember, these are the entities listed from 2nd to 6th. So the missing entities are going to be 1st, before this list, and last, 7th, after this list. So who are we missing? What entities are we missing in answer choice A? If you know, type it in the chat box. We have 7 entities. We're going to put them in order from 1st to 7th. And the answer choices in this question are giving us the middle 5 entities from 2nd to 6th. So there's a missing entity in the 1st position. There's a missing entity in the 7th position. What are those entities? So in answer choice A, we're missing, yeah, we're missing W and R. Joseph is right. We're missing W and R. So what are our rules about W? We have a VW block, don't we? So if we're missing W, where does W have to go in answer choice A? W has to go 7th, right? Because our rule is that VW is a block and V is 6th, so W would have to be 7th. Okay, no problem so far. The other entity that we're missing that Joseph says is R. Where does R have to go in answer choice A? What is our rule about R? R has to come after Q. So in answer choice A, where is the only place that R can go? It would be in the 7th spot, but we already have W there. So we have two conflicting rules, one that would place W 7th and one that would place R 7th. So that makes this a wrong answer because this cannot be an acceptable outcome of the game. It would violate at least one of the rules. All right, is everybody still with me? Francisco, you have your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to tell everyone who's out there, in order to be able to comment and for Professor Kucera to see, make sure that you have it either addressed privately to Professor Kucera or to everyone and not just to me, because then Professor Kucera or the rest of the participants are not able to see that. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Francisco. Yeah, you can just toggle who you're sending your message to. If you don't want anybody to see it, send it to me privately. If you want everybody to see it, you can send it to everybody. All right, so answer choice B is the next one we're going to look at. We have Q, S, P, T, and W. And so the question is, which two entities are we missing in answer choice B? And if you know, go ahead and put them in the chat box. Which two entities are we missing in answer choice B? Okay, we're missing R and we're missing V. Yeah, Gustavo's right, R and V. Okay, so where are R and V gonna go? Now, we already know about R because we just did that in answer choice A. R has to come after Q. So in answer choice B, R would still have to go 7th. What about V? V is a problem, isn't it? Because VW is a block, and this answer choice has W in the 6th position. So we can't put V in the 5th position next to W because T is already there. So answer choice B is going to violate at least one of those two rules, but definitely the VW block. So answer choice B is wrong. Let's look at answer choice C. Which two entities are we missing here? We have Vilas, White, Peters, Quinn, and Stanton. So we're missing T and we're missing R. Right, okay. So we've done R now twice. We know about R, right? Doesn't R have to be 7th because R has to come after Q? What about T? Where does T have to go? Can T go in the 1st position in front of Vilas? We only have one rule about T, and our only T rule says that T can't be next to S. So we can put T in the 1st position. So in answer choice C, if you fill in the remaining entities and you put T in the 1st position in front of Vilas, and you put R in the 7th position after Stanton, then all of the rules are complied with. It doesn't violate any of the rules. We would still have Q before R, we still have our VW block, we have our no TS or ST, and we have P in the 4th position. So answer choice C is correct because once you fill in the two remaining missing entities, you have an acceptable outcome of the game. Now, I usually get the question, well, if I think I have the right answer and I'm testing these one at a time, should I even look at answer choices D and E? The answer to that, it depends on how confident you are. If it were me, I would just select answer choice C and move on to the next question. If you're not that confident, then you could check them anyway. It's just time. And our problem with answer choice D is that Q and T would both have to be first, because otherwise it would violate a rule. And answer choice E is a little bit more obvious, and that's that P has to be fourth, and P is not fourth in answer choice E. So C as in Charlie is the right answer for number 2. All right, question number 3. And this is a new question type. Question number 3 says, if Tao was recruited second, which one of the following could be true? So this question type is called a new if question. New if. A new if question. And it's called a new if question because it starts with if. Seriously. But a new if question adds a rule for this question only. That's how we're going to treat it. We're being given a new rule for this question only. So you want to be careful that if you're doing a sketch, that you do a sketch for question number 3, and that then when you move on to question 4 and 5, you go back to your master sketch, because this rule that we're being given in question 3 is not going to be around in question 4 or question 5 or question 6. So our new rule is, if Tao was recruited second, which one of the following could be true? All right, so we're going to go back through our LSAT strategy, starting with reading and interpreting the rules. And this rule is pretty easy, and we could build it right into our sketch. Tao is recruited second. So what I'm going to do is, because I have the luxury of drawing on a whiteboard, but also I'm going to do it in a different color so we can keep things straight. So we have Tao recruited second. That's our rule. Just plug it right in. Now, before you go looking at the answer choices, because remember, we're taking this step by step, after we read the rules, we make deductions. So what deductions can we make at this point? Now, remember, a deduction is combining rules to find out what else must be true. In other words, can we figure out how this game is going to work? Which entities go where? And if you know, just type it in the chat box. Joseph says S cannot be first or third. Okay, that's good. S cannot be first or third. Why? Because it would violate our TS or ST rule. So that means, and Gustavo says the same thing, S can't be first or third. So S has to be 5th, 6th, or 7th. And the way I might do this is maybe let's do, well, that's a pretty thick curly Q, but it'll work for us. We have to have S somewhere over here, right? 5th, 6th, or 7th. What other deductions can we make? And while we do that, I'm going to see if I can get a better looking, there we go. What other deductions can we make about which entities can go where? And you have to trust me, the investment of time in making deductions is going to be worth it when we get to the answer choices. Dareen, I hope I pronounced that correctly, says V and W need to be next to each other. Okay, V and W do, right? That's a block. And so, and Blanca says V can be 6th. All right, so our block of entities, VW, is interesting. It has to go somewhere. I think what we could probably do is agree that V and W also have to be somewhere up here. And maybe what we could do is write it like this. And so really what I'm doing is I'm just making notations here that we know that S has to be 5th, 6th, or 7th. We know that the VW block has to go somewhere in 5th, 6th, and 7th because there's no room for it in 1st or 3rd because it's a 2-entity block. So 5, 6, and 7 has to be VW and then S, or S and then VW. Okay. Are there any other deductions we can make? So this is the crux of logic games right here. It's not the answer choices, it's making deductions. What other deductions can we make? What entities haven't we talked about yet in this question? All right, Gustavo says Q first and R third. Joseph says the same thing. That's right, because we have just filled in our 5, 6, and 7 spots, and the only 2 entities left are Q and R. And we have a rule that says Q has to come before R. So we can't put R first and Q third because that would violate that rule. So we have to have Q first and R third. So now look what we have. We have our sketch almost completely filled out. We have Q first, T second, R third, P fourth, and then VW and S in the 5, 6, and 7th spot. Now let's look at the questions. Now, when we look at questions, remember, the questions might seem really easy, but that's only because we took the time to make all the deductions up front. And so answer choice A says Quinn was recruited 3rd. Our question is, could that be true? That Quinn was recruited 3rd? No, it can't be true, right? Because R has to have been recruited 3rd. Q 3rd would violate our QR rule. So that cannot be true. A is a wrong answer choice. B says Rivera was recruited 5th. Could that be true? No, Rivero has to have been recruited 3rd. Yeah, Blanca's right. Rivero could not have been recruited 5th. Answer choice C says Stanton was recruited 6th. Now be careful here. Could Stanton have been recruited 6th? No, right? Stanton has to be either 5th or 7th, but not 6th. All right, how about answer choice D? Villas was recruited 6th. Could that be true? That could be true because here it is, right here. If we have S 5th and VW in the 6th and 7th spot, then V could have been recruited 6th. So D is the correct answer. And if we want to look at all of them, we could look at E. White was recruited 3rd. That cannot be true because White has to be either 6th or 7th. So D is the correct answer to number 3. So that's a really good example of a new if question that gives you a new rule for that question only, and then using that rule to combine rules and make deductions. So I'm going to erase these and we'll move on to the next question. I'm going to leave our master sketch intact. And question 4 says, if Quinn was recruited immediately before Rivero, then Stanton cannot have been recruited when? All right, this is another new if question. So we're going to use the same strategy, right? So our strategy with new if questions is read and interpret the rule, make deductions, and then look at the answer choices. So let me get my handy dandy text here, and it says if Quinn was recruited immediately before Rivero. So that is QR and a box around it. Quinn was recruited immediately before Rivero. So that changes our QR rule a little bit. So instead of Q coming sometime before R, now we have Q coming immediately before R, and now we have a QR block. So now the question is, what do we do with our QR block? Are there any deductions that we can make here? So maybe there's no deductions that we can make as far as inserting any of these entities into our sketch, but there's something generally to think about. And that is that we now have two blocks of entities, right? We have a VW and we have a QR. And one of those blocks is going to have to go in the first, second, and third spot. And the other block is going to have to go in the fifth, sixth, and seventh spot. And so, oops, let's get rid of that. And so I'm going to draw it like this. And again, if you're light years ahead of us and you know the answer, then don't worry about it yet. But I'm going to put a block over here, and I'm going to put a block over here. And so this shows that one of our blocks is going to go before P, and one of our blocks is going to go after P. I'm not sure there's a whole lot more we can do, except that which two entities have we not placed? We have VW, we have QR, right? Because they're in our blocks. And then we have P. And so which entities have we not placed yet? S and T, right? So we're going to have, and I'm going to do it this way, ST and over here, ST. This simply means that we have to have either S or T in front of P, and we have to have the other one, either S or T after P. So that's probably the most we can do at this point. Now let's look at the answer choices. And remember, it's asking us, Stanton cannot have been recruited when. So we're looking for the correct answer is going to be a position that Stanton cannot be in. So A says first. Can S be first? And if we want to know, the easiest way is let's test it. If we put S here, can we fill in the rest of the sketch without violating any of the rules? I think we can, because we would have a block in the 2 and 3rd position right here. And then we would have T and the other block in 5, 6, and 7. So S can go in the first position, which makes A wrong answer choice. Let's look at B. B says second. Can S go second? Well, let's try it. There's S. Can we fill in the rest of the sketch now? What's the problem now with filling in the rest of the sketch? The problem is we now have a block of entities. It doesn't matter if it's VW or QR, but we have a block of entities that needs to go before P, and there is nowhere to put that block of entities. So Stanton cannot be second without violating at least one of the rules that we now have. So B is the correct answer because S cannot go second. Now, if you want to look at the others, can S go third? Sure, because can't we put a block of entities here? And then 5, 6, and 7 would be T and the other block. And then answer choice D says, can S go fifth? Sure, because there's room for a block of entities here. And the last answer choice E says, can S go seventh? And that also is not a problem with a block of entities here. Now notice one of the answer choices is not sixth. S cannot go sixth, just like S cannot go second, but that's not one of the answer choices. So the correct answer choice is B, because the second position is the only one that S cannot go in. All right, so that's question 4. And I'm going to erase our QR block because, again, that is a new rule for question 4 only. And then when we go on to question 5, we go back to our master sketch. All right, so question 5 says, if White was recruited earlier than Rivero, and if Rivero was recruited earlier than Tao, then which one of the following could be true? All right, so this is also a new if question. But this is an interesting new if question because this is giving us 2 new rules. So somebody asks, can we do all the new if questions this way? You should do all new if questions with the same strategy, which is read and interpret the rules, make the deductions, and then look at the answer choices. And so that is the best strategy for all new if questions. So this question number 5 has 2 rules in it. We have 2 new ifs. So the first one says, if White was recruited earlier than Rivero. So I'm going to do this one step at a time. And again, you might see this a little bit ahead, but we have White before Rivero, and we have Rivero recruited earlier than Tao. So we now have 2 new rules. We have rules that implicate the same entities. And so are there any deductions we can make here? So Joseph says W has to come before T. So yes, but maybe even more. We can combine our WR rule and our RT rule. And we can say that W has to come before R, which has to come before T. And so doing that, we can get rid of this rule, and we can get rid of this rule. And both of those rules are represented in this rule, W before R before T. Now that helps us a little bit more, making that deduction, because we now have a string of entities, WRT, that all have to appear in that order. Now, are there any other deductions that we can make? Sherry says VWRT. Okay, good job, Sherry. So let's go ahead and plug in our all right, it does not like that. So let's try it this way. We can combine our VW rule and our WRT rule. So now we have the VW block and then R and then T. So now we have a string of 4 entities that all have to go in a row. Oh, and you know what? I apologize. I just realized that I moved our P. So let's put P back. That was in our master sketch. All right, so we have the VW block and then R and then T. Are there any other deductions that we can make? Joseph says QRT. Right, so what we can actually do is we can put Q in our rule here, because our rule is Q has to come before R. So we're just going to add it in with the rest of the rules. And what I'm going to do is put Q, and then we're going to draw a line to R. So hopefully this makes sense to everybody. What we've done is we've simply said VW has to come before R, and Q has to come before R. And then R has to come before T. Now, the one thing to be careful of here is to make sure that you don't mistakenly order Q with VW, because we don't know if Q comes before VW or after VW. We just know that Q and the VW block come before R. So now we have 5 entities in this giant block or string or whatever you want to call it. Can we put any of those entities in our sketch? Are there any of those entities that we can put in our sketch? So think about it. We have, okay, somebody says yes. So which ones? We have 5 entities in our little string, and we have P already in 4th position. So what entity are we missing? We're missing S. Yeah, Aaron's right. And somebody says 5, 6, 7 for, Blanca says 5, 6, 7 for QRT. So that's close. So let's focus on our missing entity. We don't have S here. Where can S go? Well, we don't know, but we know that S can't go next to T. So in trying to put these 5 entities into our sketch, we have to have R in our 6th position and T in our 7th position. Now, why do we have to have this? If you can see, great. If not, then just listen for the explanation. The only entity that we're missing is S, and S can't go next to T. So if we were going to put in an S, we can't have S here, and we can't have S here. So that means S has to go earlier on in the sequence. And that leaves only room for R and T. Now, as far as the other entities, so be careful. Somebody says that Q has to go in the 5th position. Not necessarily. And somebody says S has to be in the first or third position, and not necessarily. So this is difficult because we know that S can't be next to T, but we don't know where S has to be in relation to V and W and Q. So this gets a bit complicated, but we probably can't know for absolute sure how the rest of the entities are going to fit in. We know that VW has to go over here somewhere, our block. And we know that R has to come after VW, which is in sixth. But as far as S and Q really could go in any of those other places. So let's look at the answer choices, because this is probably all we can figure out. So somebody asked the question, why couldn't R go in the fifth position? I want to answer this just in case somebody else has the same question. Well, let's do that. Let's put R in the fifth position. Now, where do we put everybody else? Our VW block has to go in 1, 2, and 3. Our Q has to come before R. So we have to put Q over here somewhere. And then where do we put S? S can't go in the sixth position because S would be next to T. So we now have 4 entities that we have to squeeze into 3 slots. So, oops. So somebody, Gamila says Q in the first position. Well, not necessarily, because we could, for example, put Q here, right? Q could go fifth. Q could also go third, and Q could also go first. So we don't know about Q yet. There's a couple different places that that Q could go. All right, so let's look at the answer choices, because this is about the most that we can do here. Our question is, which one of the following could be true? So A says Quinn was recruited first. Could that be true? Well, maybe you saw that when you were putting all of this together, but the easy way to do this is to just test it, right? It's asking us if it could be true that Quinn could be recruited first. Well, let's put Q there and see what happens. Now we're just asking ourselves, is this an acceptable outcome of the game? Can we fill in all of the rest of the slots without violating any of the rules? And we sure can, because we could put the VW block here, and we could put S here. So that makes A the right answer, because it's asking us which one of the following could be true. Could Quinn be recruited first? And the answer is yes, Quinn could be recruited first. Let's look at the other answer choices just to make sure that everybody has a handle on this. Answer choice B says Rivera was recruited third. Could that be true? Well, no, because we already deduced that R has to be sixth. But if we want to try that, then let's try it. If we have Rivera third, then we have to put VW in the first and second spot. And then what's the problem? The problem is that V and W and Q all have to come before R. So answer choice B is really asking the question of, did you make this particular deduction right here? That's what answer choice B is asking you. All right. Answer choice C is asking us, Stanton was recruited second. Could that be true? Oops. So let's try it. What's the problem there? Now we have nowhere for our VW block. All right, so that can't be true. Answer choice D says Tau was recruited sixth. Could that be true? And no, because if you make Tau sixth, we already deduced that Tau couldn't be sixth. You're going to have the problem with your no TS or ST. And the last answer choice E, Vilas was recruited sixth. No, because you have all of these entities that have to come after Vilas, White, and Rivero, and Tau, and there's not enough room for them if you put Vilas sixth. So A is the correct answer for question number 5. All right, and let's look at the last one. And I'll erase some of our doodles from this question and return back to our master sketch. So you can see there the power of making deductions, that the questions or the answer choices become much easier if you make all of the deductions. And whoops. Question 6 says, if White was recruited immediately before Quinn, which one of the following must have been recruited sixth? All right, so we're going to do the same strategy, which is read and interpret the rule. And that is White has to come before, oh, I'm sorry, immediately before Quinn. So let me fix that. So now we have a WQ block. White was recruited immediately before Quinn. What deductions can we make here? We have 2 blocks. We have a VW block and a WQ block. So we should be able to make the deduction that Vilas comes immediately before White, which comes immediately before Quinn. And then we now have a block of entities, and we have 3 of them, not 2. All right, that's a good deduction. Are there any other deductions that we can make? I'm going to cross that out because we don't need that one anymore. Gustavo says VWQ and then R. Yes. So let's do a dash R. So now we have made the deduction that the VWQ block has to come before R. And we did that by combining our 2 rules, right? Combining our VWQ rule and our Q before R rule. So now we have VWQR. All right, that's a big deduction. And that's an important deduction. So what can we say now about our sketch? Can we determine anything that has to happen as far as placing these entities in our master sketch? Yeah, Gustavo says VWQP. Our block of 3 entities has to come before R. There's only 2 places that a block of 3 entities can go. And if we know that R has to come after our 3 entity block, then we have to have V, W, and Q. And as far as R, is there anything else we can do? Yeah, Joseph says that either T or S has to come before R and then either S or T. Let me rephrase that. R has to be in the middle between S and T. Why? Because we have a rule that says no TS or ST. So R has to separate them, otherwise we would violate our TS or ST rule. So you could even complete this if you want by doing this. And that's simply saying that either S or T has to be fifth and either S or T has to be seventh. So we have just now completely filled in, with the exception of S and T, our master sketch. So now let's look at the answer choices. It says, which one of the following must have been recruited sixth? Well, that's pretty easy now, isn't it? The answer is B, Rivero, has to have been recruited sixth. So you can see how making those deductions makes the answer choices very easy. And it may seem like it that we spend a lot of time on the deductions in this session, and that's true. You will do it much more quickly when you're taking the LSAT, but it's the same process. And you have to trust me that when you get good at making deductions, which you'll need to be, that you'll be able to do that quickly. And it's much faster to make the deductions up front and then answer the questions than it is to try and answer the questions without making the deductions. If you go to the answer choices first, then you have to test them all out, and it's much more difficult. All right, so if you have any questions about this game, go ahead and type them into the chat box. And we have just a couple more minutes before I give it back over to Francisco. And so what I want to do is just set up the next game. Just go through the overview and set it up, and then you can do the questions on your own later. So I'm going to clear this. And we're going to look at the question number, or game number 3 in your packet, which is the realtor showing houses. And it says, on a single day, a realtor will show a client 5 houses, exactly 1 house in each of 5 neighborhoods: Quarry, Riverton, Shelburne, Townsend, and Valencia. Each house will be shown to the client exactly once. The order in which the houses are shown is subject to the following constraints. All right, so far, this is pretty much a bread and butter sequencing game, because we're being asked to put these houses in order from 1st to 5th. And so our sketch is going to look like five lines with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's going to be the order of the houses, because we're being asked to order or sequence these. And then our list of entities, which is Q, R, S, T, and V. All right, so that's our overview. It's a sequencing game. Our stock master sketch is a list of entities and slots for each entity. And now we can look at the rules. Now the rules say that the house in Riverton must be shown either 1st or 2nd. Now the way I like to represent this is by having an R, and if I can draw a good curly Q, it's going to be like this. So R has to go either 1st or 2nd. Good, right? The house in Riverton must be shown either 1st or 2nd. The house in Townsend must be shown either 1st or 5th. So this may be a little bit more difficult to represent, but the way I'm going to do this is T has to be either first or fifth. So house and Townsend must be shown either first or fifth. There's T with arrows that it's one of those two. The third house shown must be the house in Query or the house in Valencia. So the way I would do this is to simply do AQV, which means that one of those must be, that in the third position must be either Q or V. And the last rule says, the house in Query cannot be shown either immediately before or immediately after the house in Shelburne. And kind of like the last game, we had one like that, and that is no QS or SQ. Now, the reason, so we're going to try to make some deductions here, and maybe there's some things you're thinking of already. But the reason I wanted to at least get through the setup of this game is to introduce you to something called limited options. And limited options occurs when you have only two ways, sometimes three, but usually two ways that the game can work out. And working a game that way makes it much easier because the questions will usually place you in one of the two options. And the way I would do this is have a Roman numeral 1 and a Roman numeral 2 represent the two options. And then we're going to recreate these. And these are our 5 slots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I won't number them. We can see that they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's do it this way. T has to be either first or fifth. So let's say in option 1, we have T first. And in option 2, we have T fifth. Now, what deductions can we make in either of those two options? If anybody knows, just go ahead and type it into the chat. Okay, so one is in option 1, R has to go second, right? Because R has to be either first or second. Okay. Now let's focus on option 1. Where do Q and V have to go in option 1? We have a rule that says no QS or SQ. In option 1, if we put V in the third spot, oops. Don't know where that came from. But if we put V in the third spot, we're going to violate our QS or SQ rule. So that means we can't have V, we have to have Q. And that means S has to be fifth and V has to be fourth. So in one of our options, we can fill out the sketch completely. When you get to the questions, we're about out of time, but when you get to the questions, you will find out that new if questions in a game with limited options usually place you in one of the two options. And there's even some more deductions that we can get. I mean, we know we have Q or V in the third spot in option 2. And that kind of limits further where other things can go. So take this home with you and do some work on it. I'm going to bounce this back over to Francisco to do some closing and provide some information about admissions. I am going to also give you, though, my email address. If anybody has questions, you can send me an email. If you want my cryptic answers and explanations to this whole packet of questions, I'll send you those. Only if you promise, though, to try the questions first before you look at the answers. So with that, I am going to bounce this back over to Francisco. And let me find you, Francisco, so I can make you the host.
Awesome. There we go. Thank you, Professor Kucera. Thank you for this. Really appreciate your time, and pretty sure the students feel the same way, the prospective students. So for those that joined us a little bit late that don't know me, my name is Francisco Rosas. I am the Assistant Director of Admissions for San Joaquin College of Law. Also here today, we have our Director of Admissions, Diane Steele. And I would just like to thank everybody for being here. I really appreciate your enthusiasm in San Joaquin College of Law and wanting to start your law school journey. I'm going to share.
Francisco, I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
I was muted. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. I want to thank Professor Kucera for being here and helping us out with this process of the outside prep nights. I am going to share my email down below. So if you want to set up a Zoom appointment so we could talk further about the admissions process today. My name is Francisco. For those that joined us a little bit late, Rosas, and I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions. Here today, we also have Diane Steele. She is the Director of Admissions for San Joaquin College of Law. And we appreciate your time and effort and enthusiasm in San Joaquin College of Law and wanting to start your law school journey. I will be sending out a survey via email right after this is over. So if you could please just go ahead and send it back to us. It is our way of making sure that we're providing quality help and guidance for everyone who is participating in these. I would really appreciate that. So it will come shortly right after this presentation. And with that, if anyone has any questions, please do so now. You could type them or unmute yourself and go ahead and speak.
You know, Francisco, Francisco, if I could just add, you know, I is normally not part of my presentation, but I did mention that I attended San Joaquin College of Law, and I just wanted to give SJCL a shameless plug because I had a fantastic experience there. And, you know, without SJCL, I would not have, you know, not have passed the bar, and it opened the door to everything that, you know, I'm doing now as a practicing attorney and working for CCLS. And so, you know, it's a wonderful school. It's an excellent asset to the Central Valley. And so anyway, I just wanted to make that shameless plug because I had a great experience there.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I also want to remind everyone, we are going to have a law school one-on-one this upcoming Tuesday from 7 to 9 p.m. So if you would like to join us, please go ahead to our website and register, or send me an email saying that you want to register for it, and I'll go ahead and register you for it. We'll have a panel of students and a professor who will talk about their experience with San Joaquin College of Law, just as Professor Kucera kind of just spoke about a little bit here, right? His experience. And you could ask them questions. On top of that, I'll be able to talk about our law school, what your experience would be, our culture of the institution. So it's a really great panel that we'll be having this upcoming Tuesday, April 21st. So please go ahead and join if you'd like to. And with that, Diane, do you have some few words you would like to say?
I did have one question.
I just want to thank you, Francisco, and thank you, Professor Kucera, for an excellent job. It was wonderful to see so many people on. Additionally, we have a career panel coming up on May 12th that we also welcome you back to join us. Dean Janice Pearson will be there along with 3 of our alums talking about their experience at San Joaquin College of Law and their unique career path that they are currently doing now. So you'll be able to see all the diverse things that you can do with a Juris Doctor degree. And thank you everybody for being present on this Saturday morning. That was fantastic.
Yes, definitely. So I heard somebody had a question. Roberts, I believe.
I was just wondering about cost and LSAT score for admission to San Joaquin College of the Law.
Yeah, awesome. That's a great question. So that's one of the few stuff that we'll cover in the Law School 101, but obviously, I could go into a little bit of the detail here right now. So the cost of it's a total of 86 units to graduate from our institution. And per unit, you're looking at $975 per unit. So that is the cost of it overall, right, of the program. We're looking about $83,000 completion of the program. And that's tuition and fees. Cost of living obviously is separate, right? But that being said, my experience of seeing the price and cost of other institutions versus us, I feel that it's very affordable for a great solid education that we provide.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. I have some. Let me see. I have some questions here. I have a master's of college. How long does it take to complete? Okay, so one of the other questions is how long does it take to complete the program? The program takes 3 to 4 years. Everybody is accepted into the 4-year program, and so if you do well your first year, then you are able to petition to move on and graduate in 3 years. And so obviously 4 years is the entrance point. 3 years would be the next point there, right? If you do well your first year. And it's just simply to make sure that you're going to be successful in completing the program in 3 years. It is rigorous. So that's just one of the precautions they take and make sure that you're going to do well, right? And be able to graduate and pass the bar. We also have a 5-year program, and that is also something that you could petition with our academic deans there as well. Mm-hmm. And let me see. How many units are needed? So total units to complete the program is 86 units to be able to graduate with. Yep. Any other questions? Diane, do you have something you would want to add to that?
No, I think you've covered it. Professor Kucera, anything else you want to add?
No, I don't. Other than if anybody has specific questions for me, I put my email address in the chat. I'd be happy to answer questions about SJCL or about the LSAT. Stick around. I know some people asked to do this again, and I think we're going to have Diane another date maybe in May for this event. And I'm going to try to cycle through some different questions. So if you attend in May, we may start with the one that we just started at the end of today, or some new ones. And so stay in touch with the school if you're interested in doing more of these kind of as you go through your LSAT prep.
We're also interested to know if you prefer the Saturday class or if an evening could work. We're trying to zero in on when we get the best attendance. So we appreciate that. And I know we've said it already, but I can't emphasize it enough that this Friday, April 24th is the deadline to register for June 8th LSAT. And that's the last LSAT that you can take for fall 2020 admissions. And if you're admitted, law school starts on August 10th.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, a few more questions here, so I'm gonna go down the line. So the next one is, what is the minimum requirement to be admitted into the program? Okay, so the committee is gonna look for 4 key components, right, that you'll be needing to turn in, and pretty much every law school does the same thing. Our law school here, minimum requirements for the LSATs, we look for a score of a 150. So the range is 120 to 180, as Professor Kucera explained earlier. We at the institution look for a score of 150, but we look at the holistic view of the student. Therefore, it could go up and down depending on the GPA, letters of recommendation, and other factors that they consider here. So LSATs, right, 150. The GPA that we look for is a GPA of 3.0 or better. Again, holistic view, so it could hover up and down just a little bit depending on how strong you are in other elements. And so is the GPA, and then a bachelor's degree in any major could definitely get you in, right? There is a way to get into our institution as a regular student with an associate's degree. Now, there's a quick caveat to that. Associate's degree and the LSAT score definitely needs to be higher, right? Because now you're competing with those that have bachelor's and advanced degrees as well. So 150 definitely for the LSAT, 3.0 for associate's degree is what they're looking for. And another quick thing there about that is that if you have an associate's degree and you only have 60 units instead of 72, in order to use the loans that are available through financial aid, you would need a total of 72 units to be able to use those loans to, if that's what you're looking for, in order to finance your education. So that is the requirements there. Another requirement through letters of recommendation from professors that you've known, right? So that somebody could talk about how well you're doing in academics and whatnot. So we look for professors. If you've been out of school for a while, we understand we're geared towards a second career type of institution. So that is fine. If you know anyone in the legal community who knows you well, there's not a family member, that's another great thing that they would use. And then as well, the next best thing is your colleagues, right? Supervisors, someone that can speak about your work ethic is the next best thing that we look for there. So letters of recommendation, GPA, bachelor's or associates, and then personal statements. We're gonna need a personal statement from you. Who are you? Why do you want to come to law school, right? We could see all these other elements, right? The numbers and whatnot. But that's where we're going to take a view into who you are as a person and what kind of strength you're going to bring to the institution, right? To the learning environments here. So who are you? Why do you want to go to law school? Have you faced challenges in higher education? And if so, how have you overcome those challenges, right? The committee's trying to find that grit within that person who is writing the personal statement. 1 to 3 pages long, it'd be sufficient. So those are the requirements, sir. Those are the minimum requirements that we're looking for. So hopefully if you need more information, more detailed information, right, or have more questions, because obviously I just said quite a bit of things there, that's fine. Send me or Diane an email, give us a call, and we'll be more than happy to meet with you and to guide you through the process. That is our pleasure to do. We love doing that. Correct, Dan?
Absolutely. We look forward to meeting you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so
Hey Francisco, there was somebody asked a question about internships. Can I take a moment to answer that?
Yes, please.
So SJCL has the cool geographic benefit of being the only law school in like our surrounding like 9 or 10 counties. And that makes it really unique for internships because in Fresno, we have not only the Fresno County Superior Court, we also have the United States District Court for the Eastern District of California, and we have the 5th District Court of Appeals. And whereas in a major market area like LA or San Francisco, you have a lot of students competing for very few internship positions. In our Central Valley, we have awesome internship opportunities and not as many students competing for them. My first year of law school, I interned with the United States District Court with one of the magistrate judges summer after my first year, and that's a very uncommon thing to do in most law school settings. I also had an internship with a private law firm after that while I was in law school. And I'll say my organization now, CCLS, takes law school interns all the time. Plus we have a summer fellowship program that actually pays a stipend to students. And so the internship opportunities, and I haven't even mentioned the DA's offices in 4 or 5 counties nearby and public defender's offices. So there are an incredible number of internship opportunities available to students at SJCL. So I just wanted to take a moment to answer that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So the next question here is, have we heard about different time frames for the LSAT Flex? All right, so I did a little bit of research, right? The next for the LSAT Flex, and this only pertains to those that register for the March and for the April. And the March actually got pushed to the April, and then both of them were canceled, right? So LSAC has created the LSAC Flex. Professor Kucera talked a little bit about it earlier of how it's going to work. Do we accept it? Of course we do, yes. Now, the dates that they have on file right now are going to be on Monday, the 18th, okay? Or Tuesday, the 19th. And the time frames are yet to be determined. And so you would have to contact LSAC for those times, right? And this only pertains, again, to those that were registered for the April and to the March. And then along that week of the 18th, there's going to be a smaller proctor exams, remote proctor exams as well that they'll be able to do in that same week period. The release dates for the results will be June 5th. So that's as much information as we have right now. You could always reach out to LSAC too as well, or go to their website. I know this is where I found this information as well. So lsac.org, and they're putting out as much as possible. These dates actually just came out like 2-3 days ago. So it's a pretty good place to go and kind of take a look at what they have going on there. Let me see placements. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up with where am I at. Information. Thank you. Oh, we're glad you love the information. So how long does it take? So another one is how long does it take to get the results from the June LSAT? I didn't look at the dates, but it should be up there already. If you go to the June LSAT, there should already be a release date on there. I think they placed it up there yesterday, if I remember correctly, but I don't remember the date. Sorry about that. I apologize. Is there?
Usually it's 3 weeks after the test.
Yes. Let me see. All right. So it appears no more questions. Again, I will send the survey right after this is over to all those that participated today. Appreciate it. And the survey is just to help us better serve you as a community. So please take the time, if you could, to just respond to our survey. I would really appreciate it. And I know some may have taken the survey before because you've attended other events, but it's for our purposes to make sure that we're just staying on top of who our audience is, how we could best serve you. So please, if you would do us a favor, I would really appreciate it. And then again, April 21st, which is this next Tuesday, 7 to 9 p.m., you could register with our new Law School 101. And then May 12th, we have the career panel as well. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate your time and your interest in San Joaquin College of Law. All right. No more questions that appear. Okay. Thank you everyone for being here. We'll see you all next time. And any communications you may need, please reach out to us. We are always there and willing to help and guide you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye.